Yeah, yeah. All right.
Good to see David today.
All right, so, yeah, I'm excited to be here today to talk to you all about the eastern whippoorwill and some of the cool stuff that I've been fortunate enough to work on with the species and some of the results that we found over the past few years of the research that I've been conducting. So the eastern whippoorwill. All right, is a nocturnal aerial insectivore. And it inhabits the forests of eastern North America. So it falls into two groups that are experiencing significant population declines: aerial insectivores and eastern forest birds. So it's no surprise that a species that falls into multiple groups is among the most imperiled. The eastern whippoorwill, as you can see here in this range map, covers breeding season distribution, covers most of the eastern U.S. as well. It goes out into the Midwest and up into Canada. And during its time within this breeding season distribution, it requires diverse forest conditions ranging from early successional forests to mature forests. And again, the species is experiencing significant population declines, and over the past half century has lost nearly 64% of its population. And the primary factors thought to be contributing to the species decline are reduced food availability, and moths are its primary food source, as well as habitat loss and degradation. And whenever we think of habitat loss for the eastern whippoorwill, we mostly think about it in terms of forest succession. So we have a young forest and it grows old eventually and into this mature forest, which is no longer suitable for the species. Before I go too in depth about the species habitat associations, I want to talk about how unique it is. So this is the eastern whippoorwill. How many of you have heard of whippoorwill before? Yeah, all right. How about seen a whippoorwill? No, exactly. So a big factor is it's active at night, right? So during the day, it's not really out and about. You don't see it jumping around like many of our songbirds. But also it has this really cryptic coloration that allows it to blend into its surroundings really well. So some mottled black, brown, and tan pattern allows it to blend in with the leaf litter where it lays its eggs, as well as up in trees where it roosts. And it has this really large eye, whiskers. I don't know if you can see the whiskers there, but they have some little whiskers, and then a deceivingly small mouth. Oh, and this is for those who aren't familiar, the whippoorwill song. So if we look at this image here, you can see that eye that's glowing there. It allows it to really at night be able to identify its prey against the backlight of the moon, and I'll discuss that a little bit more in the next few slides, as well as this really large mouth, right? It is deceivingly small compared to that beak, and the whiskers in that large mouth really allows it to fly up into the air and grab its prey while mid-flight. And then again, this species nests right on the leaf litter. There you call it a nest. It lays it right on top of those leaves, and what emerges eventually is this alien-like chick, right? And what's really cool about the whippoorwill is that its ecology is really closely tied to the lunar cycle. So it lays its eggs during the first full moon whenever it arrives back on the breeding ground, and then those eggs hatch during the next full moon cycle. And this is a period whenever it's easiest for the parents to capture the prey, right? So, which is also a period when the chicks are requiring a lot of resources. So whenever we think about whippoorwill foraging, okay. Again, it uses the backlight of the moon to identify and capture its prey. So if we have a mature forest like this, where that bird is sitting underneath all those trees, and if it looks up in the sky, it's not gonna be able to see the moon, right? It's pretty dark underneath there. So we have a moth that would fly over this forest and it would escape. But if we have a young forest with some variation, that will then be able to fly up through there, see its moth flying behind the moon or in front of the moon, and easily capture its prey. So you may be wondering, what is whippoorwill habitat? I said it requires diverse forest conditions. So on the image on the left-hand side here, we have a forest that's about 15 to 20 years old. And we may have a whippoorwill using this patch. Maybe it's nesting in here. In the middle image, maybe we'll have a bird sitting underneath that small pine on a nest, or it could be up in this larger pine roosting during the day. And then finally, on the image on the right, at nighttime, maybe we'll have a bird out here foraging, trying to capture those moths. But also during the day, maybe it's over on that mature forest edge where maybe it has its nest, or it's up in those trees roosting. And there's been a lot of research that's been conducted on the eastern whippoorwill and its habitat associations. And what we're able to pretty confidently say is that what whippoorwill habitat is not. And that is a homogeneous forest, such as what you see here, right? Anywhere you point to on this map, where you're here, this picture, whether you're here, back in the back here, it's going to look something like this. And we can say that whippoorwill will not use homogeneous landscapes, right? It needs diverse conditions. And luckily, there's a lot of efforts that are ongoing in the eastern United States for many imperiled species, such as the golden-winged warbler, the New England cottontail, and the cerulean warbler. And the New England cottontail is getting a lot of attention here in Massachusetts. It's a rapidly declining rabbit species. And these efforts are occurring on our private lands through programs such as the Natural Resource Conservation Service, as well as our public lands. So knowing this, we knew what sites we wanted to monitor for our research. We knew that conservation efforts for these three species may also benefit eastern whippoorwill. So we knew we wanted to monitor sites that were managed for these three species. Now, how are we going to monitor these sites? Traditional whippoorwill surveys follow a protocol similar to that of the Nightjar Survey Network. And is anybody familiar with this? No. So this is a large-scale volunteer-based survey that is conducted annually across the United States for nightjar species. And as you can see here, there's not a ton of activity in New England, and this is mostly contributed to the state agencies actually going out and doing these surveys rather than having the public do them. And this protocol has several constraints. They have to be conducted at night. It's confined to two-week survey windows that are centered around the lunar cycle. So outside of the lunar cycle, whenever you don't have full moon illumination, is a period when whippoorwill are less active vocally. These surveys occur from roadsides. They occur for 6 minutes once a year, and they're dependent upon optimal weather conditions. So large-scale monitoring across, say, the eastern United States to monitor all of those sites that are managed for those three species is very logistically difficult. So oftentimes our survey areas are much smaller than what we'd ideally hope for. Now, to address monitoring challenges for logistically difficult species, we have technology that can help facilitate monitoring, right? We have camera traps, for example. We have technology such as geolocators, and these are used to track a species movements based on day length. As well as more recently autonomous reporting units, or ARUs. And these are used to monitor species via auditory cues. And typically whenever we think about auditory cues, we think about vocalizations, right? But there's other auditory cues as well, such as drumming, what we hear woodpeckers or grouse make. So here we have a few sound clips from recordings from ARUs. Is there a way to turn the volume up, Dave?
Perhaps.
If not, no worries.
Okay. We can do that, okay. Try it again.
I do have one that is very loud.
Okay, well, let's figure out.
No scared.
No.
So that was a barn owl, right? We hear those around here. This is a juvenile or a fledgling barred owl, fresh out of the nest, begging for food from its parent. This is a rough grouse drumming. And then a prairie warbler singing. And you know, we can hear all three of these species here in Massachusetts. And this technology is really growing in popularity as the technology itself, the analysis of its data, and the cost of these units are becoming more user friendly. And to deploy a single ARU, and this specific model is called an audio moth, and this is about the size of a credit card. These are all the supplies you need. So you have your unit itself, this little microchip SD card that will go into the unit, 3 AA batteries, and you throw it into a Ziploc bag and zip tie it to a tree, and it can last for about 180 hours worth of recording. So that's a lot of recording for a small unit like this. So this has really facilitated our large scale monitoring effort.
Can I ask, does it record all the time or only when there's noise, does it go up?
You can program it to do either. So we can say turn on at specific times, or you know, have it record for up the whole first 180 hours that's deployed out there. So now I'm gonna start getting into some of our research. So my research had two main objectives. First was to assess whippoorwill occurrence across a gradient of forest management intensity. So ranging from unmanaged forest to overstory removal and clear cuts, right? Which are the treatments that are used for when managing for the golden-winged warbler and the New England cottontail. And then also to identify landscape and microhabitat characteristics that influence whippoorwill occurrence. So we wanted to know what was in the landscape. Was there a lot of forest, agriculture, maybe urban? What influenced where whippoorwill occurred, as well as at the site, what species of trees, plants, for example, or how many trees influenced whippoorwill being at a site. So over the course of 2020 and 2021, we deployed 1,265 autonomous recording units ranging from Western North Carolina to Southern Maine. And these were deployed across public and private lands. And they really were across a variety of forest management practices, ranging from mature unmanaged forests to managed forests. So some of the sites look like this right here. So it's mature unmanaged forest. You go through a walk through the woods, maybe down a nice hiking trail, and you look up, you're not seeing any blue sky typically above you. A shelterwood harvest is a form of forest management that is used to regenerate certain tree species, specifically oak and Appalachia. And whenever you walk through this forest, you look up, you'll have some trees above you, and then you walk a little bit further, maybe you'll have some blue sky. But it's mostly closed canopy for the most part. There is some gaps though. Then you have an overstory removal. This is your young forest. If you were to walk through this, you get poked a lot by briars. It'd be pretty difficult. And occasionally you'd run into a canopy tree. And then you have your clear cut, which is the primary treatment for the New England cottontail. And this is whenever there's no residual trees. So again, Eastern whippoorwill surveys are tied to the lunar cycle. So there's two-week survey windows annually. And we programmed our units to record for 2 hours a day from 9 to 11 o'clock at night, which is a period when whippoorwill are noted to be vocally active. And we deployed these units to capture at least one of the 2 whippoorwill survey windows. After these units had been out there for a while, we returned back to the site to collect vegetation data, again, to see how many trees were around those units, what type of trees, you know, how dense and the height of that vegetation. And then once we had collected all of our units and conducted all the vegetation surveys, we returned back to the lab and started collecting landscape level data at various spatial extents around each ARU location. And next came the fun part and the difficult part, which was processing all of our recordings. So over the course of the 2 years, we collected over 60 terabytes worth of data, which is equivalent to about 140,000 hours. And that's, I think, around 6 years worth of straight listening. So we had to figure out how to get around this huge hurdle. And to do this, we had to train the computer to identify the image of a whippoorwill song. And this is what's called a machine learned classifier. So we went through and we found clips that had whippoorwill singing. Once we identified these clips, we identified hundreds of these. We physically drew a box around the whippoorwill song. So these little black tick marks here are the whippoorwill song. We did this for hundreds of clips. And this trained the computer every possible way to come across a whippoorwill song, whether it was close up, or if it was really off in the distance and is barely visible on there, or maybe had a frog singing over top of it. And whenever we did this, we were able to assess whether a site was occupied or unoccupied. And of our sites that we surveyed, we found that 562 had whippoorwill present, and we were able to identify several site level and landscape level results that influence whippoorwill occupancy. So I was trying to figure out how to best show these results, because these plots are pretty sciencey, but the more I tried, I thought it was getting a little bit confusing. So I stuck with this plot, and all we really need to know is that this right here is the probability that a whippoorwill would occupy a site. And this is our predictor variable, otherwise known as basal area in this case. And this is just the number of trees. So as you move from left to right, you're increasing in the number of trees. And you can see that we have a negative relationship. So as you increase the number of trees where the ARU was, the lower probability that the site was occupied by a whippoorwill. So, but note that, so all these are data points. You can see that we had quite a few data points along here. But remember that it stays high even with, a few trees present. So not necessarily getting rid of all trees. Next was stem density. So this is what's called a quadratic effect. So it had a hump, which means that there's a value at which the number of stems was maximized whippoorwill occupancy, and this peaked at about 10 stems per meter squared. And whenever we think about this, it's kind of difficult to think about. Over here, we have a forest with low stem density. There's a lot of trees in a general area, but those are larger trees, so there's going to be less than if you're over here where you have a lot of trees in a very small area. And we found that whippoorwill like to occupy something that looks like this. And then in terms of the landscape variables, we found that whippoorwill had a negative relationship, occupancy had a negative relationship with the amount of imperviousness. So as the amount of imperviousness or urban land cover increased in the landscape, the lower probability that the site was occupied by a whippoorwill. So a negative relationship. And we found that whippoorwill occupancy was really strongly tied to the amount of oak forest in the landscape. So as the amount of low oak forest in the landscape increased, the probability of whippoorwill occupancy increased. And this was probably one of our strongest results. It's because oak has the highest abundance and diversity of Lepidoptera or moths, and therefore which is the primary prey of the eastern whippoorwill. So it would make sense that the species would be strongly tied to oak forests. And then finally, we found that there was a peak for the amount of young forest in the landscape, shrub, at about 10%, which makes sense with other young forest dependent species of having diverse forest conditions across the landscape. We need mature forest and we need young forest and a diversity of age classes across a landscape to meet the needs of these species. And from these results, we were able to produce something that's pretty cool, which is called a predictive map. So this is these orange areas or the hot areas are where whippoorwill are really likely to occupy given the surrounding landscape. And then the blue is where it's unlikely to occupy. Notice that, you know, these urban areas, Springfield, Boston, Lowell, even Greenfield up here, you know, it's blue, it's cold. It's because that impervious land cover really drove that relationship. But over here, where we have a lot of oak forests, and specifically you can see Montague Plains, Muddy Brook. This was the Brimfield Tornado Path. Pretty interesting that that pops up going across there. These are hot spots for where eastern whippoorwill would occur across Massachusetts. And this is a really cool and important tool that helps inform where management should occur in the landscape. And then also for biologists who are looking for the species, maybe they're conducting other research, where can they go to have a really good chance of actually finding whippoorwill in the state? So this is a really cool tool that's going to be useful in the future to both managers and biologists. And we took this research one step further, and we were able to use light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. And what LiDAR is it's a transmitter that's attached to the bottom of the plane, and it shoots lasers down to the ground. And those lasers eventually hit off of something, whether it be a tree, a rock, the ground, and it bounces back up into the airplane. And we were able to create a 3D representation of the physical environment, right? So here we have our airplane flying back and forth across Pennsylvania. This is where the data set was available. We're able to make this 3D point cloud. And whenever we analyze this 3D point cloud, we can create some pretty cool figures, and then also to identify some really important information regarding whippoorwill occupancy and what influence whippoorwill occupancy and abundance. So if we look at these two landscapes here, this one on the left is a active working landscape. So these are overstory removal harvests or young forests. These are mature forests, intact forests, and you can see that this cookie over here had a higher predicted abundance. So we're expecting that there'll be more whippoorwill to be in this landscape than over here at the state park, Ohio State Park in southwestern Pennsylvania. This is a mature homogeneous forest.
What do the colors mean?
Great question. So red is taller vegetation, blue is lower vegetation, than yellow's in the middle. So this is actually someone's yard here. And and this is a mature intact forest, so a tall forest. So we can see that these landscapes, what landscapes resulted in the most whippoorwill, which will influence how we manage for the species in the future. And this is LiDAR has emerged as a really important tool, not just for whippoorwill, but for many declining wildlife species. So this is where we're going right now. And these management, these results are going to be used to inform habitat management guidelines. So we see these guidelines that inform how to manage for species such as the golden winged warbler, the American woodcock, the cerulean warbler, the New England cottontail. And now with these results, we're going to be able to create one of these guidance documents that will be used to manage for the eastern whippoorwill, which will be really important. None currently exist. So some of the conclusions that we can say is that in terms of ARUs is that they really provide a lot of unique opportunities. And our units were out there recording, I said, from 9 to 11 o'clock at night, but we also had a morning recording as well. And so with proper planning and programming, we're able to monitor multiple taxa during a single ARU deployment. So our research, not only although I focused on the eastern whippoorwill, we have students that are looking at songbird species. So in this clip, we can hear a wood thrush, hummingbird, redstart. These are all species that now other biologists can use this recording data to examine what influences their abundance and their occupancy as well. This one may be loud. I have it. Don't know. Yep. So we have coyote tips. So someone who's interested in looking into coyote can identify those habitat associations for that species. And then finally, there's a really cool project that's currently going on the eastern gray tree frog. And if we listen closely, you can actually hear a whippoorwill singing in the back of this one. So you can see how we can use these recordings not just for whippoorwill. So this is a site that was occupied for whippoorwill, but now another student is now using this same data set to look at habitat associations of the eastern gray tree frog, which is really cool. And it's going to be a really powerful tool in the future. And just to wrap up, I just want to say that we're going to be out in the field probably May 25th. I have an asterisk here. It's still to be decided, but we're going to be walking through the Montague Plains and listening for this species, although it is back right now on the breeding grounds, and hope to hear some of these and answer some questions while actually out there in an area that's managed for the eastern whippoorwill. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we'll advertise that night walk, on our, email that you should get, so. And the meeting time and place and all that, so.
Yeah. This is a bit off your topic, but how do you get a comparable set of data to do this kind of study for a species that doesn't vocalize like New England cottontail?
Good question. So it is definitely taxa like the New England cottontail where they don't vocalize. It is a little bit more challenging. You have to use other techniques. So I've seen so New England cottontail looks very similar to the eastern cottontail. So it's kind of hard to tell them apart just by pictures.
Yeah.
So in terms of the monitoring the New England cottontail, what we see a lot of times is pellet samples. So we go out there and actually collect the pellets, and then we're able to extract DNA from those pellets and say, oh, is this a New England cottontail or is it just an eastern? And then when we find those sites that are occupied by New England cottontail, we can try to expand that population by kind of managing around that area.
So the DNA profile is different enough between Eastern and New England.
Yep.
Yeah.
And up until not too long ago, there's another species found in southern Appalachia, like Pennsylvania, the Appalachian cottontail. They were originally, I don't even know how many years ago, it wasn't too long ago, that they were thought to be the same species. And they actually were able to say that they were distinct enough that those are now two different species. So yeah, genetics is a really cool tool that's also amazing. Yeah.
How does the change in the warming of the climate that we've been experiencing in recent years affect your studies, if at all?
I can't say that it affects our studies. It does affect how we need to think about management in the future. In terms of, whenever we manage for there's a lot of, not just climate, we have to think about invasive species as well. There's a lot of challenges that are out there for us. We have overabundant deer populations, invasive species, unsustainable logging practices. All these things have to be factored together whenever we start to think about managing for species such as the eastern whippoorwill. And these challenges need to be considered by foresters whenever we're out there out in the field doing this stuff. So I wouldn't say from a research perspective it's necessarily changed how we have to monitor our sites, but in terms of creating habitat for the species, there's a lot of challenges that we have to think about. Yeah.
Do the young of the whippoorwill stay in the area that they were born, or do they go off?
That's a great question. And the whippoorwill is a very understudied species. So I think there's probably only 5 studies in the eastern US that actually examine whippoorwill. And none of them have looked at chicks. So, but I will say that species such as the golden-winged warbler, we see them go from a young forest where they're born, so they are a young forest dependent species. They nest in harvests that are about 5 years old, and they move from the 5-year-old harvest over to maybe a shelter wood into the mature forest, and they're bouncing around. So what we see is that the species actually moves from where it was born to a completely different age class. And same with a species like the wood thrush, where they nest in mature forest, we'll see that same species come out into young forest. So if I had to guess, I would say that we probably see something very similar with the eastern whippoorwills. We kind of see them use these diverse forest conditions while they're on the breeding grounds after the fledglings leave the nest. Yeah.
Why are there fewer moths, their food source available?
What's that?
Why are there fewer moths that they
Yeah.
food available?
It's a lot of things. challenge, our oak forests are in a lot of trouble. So we're seeing our oak forests start to shift, where due to say fire suppression, here in New England especially, we're seeing white pines replace oaks in the canopy. So we're seeing fewer oaks out there. Also, there's a tie with the understory, which is like the blueberries. And whenever you have a closed canopy forest, it suppresses the growth of those blueberries, and we start to see it. So it's these communities, we have to think about a community whenever we manage a forest, and everything is working together, right? And we see these oak forests that originally had a lot of moss. So if we go to Montague Plains, there's a ton of moss species there. And at a landscape scale, we have less oak woodlands with blueberries and other species that support a lot of moths, and that's one reason. And another reason is potentially, we see pesticide use could be is probably a factor, especially around farms. Yeah, and those are probably the two main things that I can think of that are influencing moths, but I know some people that do a lot of insect studies, and yeah, our insects are in a lot of trouble right now, so yeah. But management, like what we see at the Montague Plains or at Muddy Brook or Birch Hill, WMA, those are all great examples, are really important, and we're seeing insects really respond super well there between pollinators like bees. We see moth species, butterfly species, all sorts of cool stuff are occupying the sites after we get back in there and try to restore it to what it was whenever we had natural disturbances creating that habitat, that forest community and maintaining it.
We could add a couple things to that for you people that have a lot of lawns and stuff, keep the Kevlar and mosquito squat away. You know what I mean? And, we've really been putting a lot of chemicals on our landscape, and, that's all to the detriment of all the different insect species that we need to have to make things go around. So, we can all do our part by minimizing what we do in our own landscapes and not make it worse.
Right, and birds are really important ecosystem. They provide really important ecosystem services, and they lower pest abundances are in these landscapes. So, for example, there's a really cool study that was conducted out of our lab at UMass by a student, where if you have forests proximate to coffee farms, they have decreased pest abundance because you have the benefits of the birds actually going out there and eating those pests. Whereas if you just have a pure sun coffee farm where there's no forest surrounding it, you have higher pests, and therefore those farmers are leaning heavily on pesticides to decrease the pests that influence the coffee crop. So birds play a really important role in terms of decreasing pest abundance as well. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, John. You'll keep trying to talk to him direct, you talk to him private. So.